Hi, my name is Philip Deturi. I am the Director of Education at FiCycle, and today I'm going to be giving a talk which we call Wealth Not Cash. This talk is directed at two groups of people. The first group is teachers of the FiCycle course. This talk will cover the first unit or so and teach you some of the basics of personal finance. To that same end, this is also useful for anyone who's interested in learning more about wealth and personal finance. So let's get started. The essential question that we're going to be examining today is, if you want to be wealthy in the long run, should you spend or save your money? And we're going to be looking at two characters to start. The first character is Stingy Steve. Stingy Steve saves all the money he can get his hands on. He spends the minimum possible on living costs. He eats ramen every night and cuts all the corners he can to scrimp and save as much cash as he can get. Flashy Fiona, on the other hand, saves virtually none of the cash she receives. Whenever she gets a paycheck, she tends to spend her money, often on things like jewelry, clothes, or other goods. After living their respective lifestyles for 5 years, Steve has $120,000 in cash, while Fiona only has $250. So who do you think's in the better financial position? As you might have guessed, there's more to the story. Stingy Steve also borrowed $50,000 from Shady Pete the loan shark because he wanted to have more cash in his house. Pete wants $90,000 back by the end of the month and does not like to be made to wait. To avoid spending too much, Steve also bought cheap clothes that are now falling apart, and he lives in a small one-bedroom apartment building that he rents that's also falling apart. Flashy Fiona, on the other hand, recently completed an expensive law degree and is ready to start working as an attorney in New York. She has bought an apartment in a fashionable area of Brooklyn that has appreciated in value, and she owns a wardrobe full of designer clothes and stocks in rising startups. So, who do you think's in a better financial position now? Does cash tell us the whole story? I mean, we know that Steve really likes having cash, but he also owns a lot of money to the loan shark Shady Pete, and he has spent his money on clothes that are now falling apart. So he does have more cash on hand than Fiona. Fiona, on the other hand, has invested in property in an up-and-coming neighborhood, has invested in stocks, owns quality clothes, has a law degree that will help her hopefully earn more income in the coming years. However, she has less cash than Steve. The answer is that it's really not so simple. There is no direct connection between wealth and cash savings. However, you will find that most people, especially your students if you're a teacher, tend to think that cash means wealth, but it really doesn't. If we want to know if someone's in a good financial position, it's not enough to just look at how much cash they have. We have to look at their entire financial situation. Cash is the most important thing if looking at your immediate situation, but wealth is what you want to consider if you're thinking about your financial issues over your entire financial life cycle. Now, what is your financial life cycle? Well, this phrase comes from a Nobel Prize winning theorem in economics called the life cycle hypothesis of saving by a man named Franco Modigliani. What this hypothesis says is that we can think of our financial lives as being broken into 5 categories: education, early career, family, late career, and retirement. However, in some phases of our lives, such as education and retirement, our income is less than our expenses. In other phases in our lives, such as early career, family, and late career, our income exceeds our expenses. And what Franco Modigliani said is that in order to successfully navigate one's financial life cycle, they need to understand 2 principles. The first is that you can transfer consumption from one period of life to another, either taking money from your future self in the form of a loan, or transferring money to your future self in the form of an investment. The second thing we need to understand is that every time we do that, we incur risk. Now, in order to go a little bit deeper, we need to define some terms. We first need to define consumption. Consumption is the use of a good that reduces its value. In general, people find examples involving food to be very easy to understand consumption. An easy example is a slice of pizza. I buy a slice of pizza, or I buy a slice of pizza for $2. Before I eat it, it's worth $2. After I eat it, it's not worth anything. I have consumed it. People understand that idea of consumption. However, much more difficult for people to understand is some other examples. For instance, I can also consume a pair of sneakers. Now, I don't have to eat them to consume them. When I wear a pair of sneakers and they get dirty and I use them, I'm reducing their value. If I buy a new pair of Air Jordans, maybe they're worth $100, but after I wear them and they're all dirty, no one's going to pay me $100 for my dirty sneakers. So once I've taken them out of the box and worn them, I have, in a sense, consumed them. Another example would be watching your school football game. If you don't have to pay, if it's a free game, you're not consuming anything by watching it. What about an NFL game? Well, if I had to buy a ticket, I consume that ticket. Again, not because I plan on eating the ticket, but because once I buy that ticket, let's say it's worth $65. When I go to the game, I have used the ticket and I've consumed it. Now that ticket is worth nothing because the game has happened and the game has passed. So in a sense, I can consume a ticket to a game. However, that doesn't mean that going to watch my school football team play a game is consumption. If I didn't have to pay anything for that, I'm not consuming anything. Nothing decreases in value as a result of me watching a free game. However, if I had to pay a ticket for the game, that ticket decreases in value once I use it. Now, consumption is important because we're going to use it to define wealth. Wealth measures your ability for consumption. The greater your wealth, the greater your ability to consume. Now, don't get me wrong. You can use cash to pay for goods to consume. So cash does increase your wealth, but it's not the only way to increase your wealth. Theoretically, I could probably go out on the street right now with a bar of gold and trade it to someone for their sandwich. I could get a sandwich with gold. Now, maybe it's not a good deal if I give a bar of gold for a sandwich, but I'm just sort of driving home the point that cash is just one good that stores value that can be used for consumption. So we're talking about personal finance. It's important to point out that the aim of personal finance education is to teach people how to effectively manage their wealth, not just their cash, so that they can successfully navigate their financial life cycle. To do this, we need to understand 4 key concepts. That is income, expense, asset, and liability. So let's go through them now. The first is income. Income is an increase in wealth. When you receive goods, your ability to when you receive income, your ability to consume goods increases. So the most familiar form of income that most people don't struggle with is a wage. If I have a job and I get paid $5 an hour and I work for 2 hours, someone's going to give me $10, and now I have $10 more with which to consume. But wages aren't the only reason that you have an increased ability to consume. In fact, anytime you receive cash or something of value without giving up something in exchange, this is income. So students love silly examples, but if you steal money from your sister and she doesn't find out, that's income. If you rob a bank and don't get caught, that's income. If you find a penny on the floor and pick it up, that is income. Another very important source of income is income that comes from financial instruments, such as investments, retirement funds. How do you know if something is income? Use the definition of wealth. Stop and ask yourself, when my financial situation changes, is it now possible for me to consume more than it was before? If so, then I have received income. The flip side of income is expense. Expense is defined as a decrease in wealth. When you incur expenses, your ability to consume goods decreases. Your wealth decreases. The most familiar kind of expense is when you spend cash and immediately consume something. Again, I'm going to use the pizza example or the food example, right? I spend money on food, I eat it, that's an expense. However, whenever your cash decreases without you gaining something of financial value in return, it's an expense. So to go back to those silly examples, if someone steals from me, that's an expense. If I decide to throw a penny in the fountain to make a wish, that's an expense. If I give money to someone begging for money on the street, that is an expense. Similarly, if I go to an ATM and I take money out from an ATM and they charge me a $2 fee, that's an expense. Now, it's important to note, however, that if you spend cash on something and it retains value, it's not an expense. So I can give the example of a house. If I buy a house and it retains its value, then it wasn't an expense because I still have the same amount of wealth. If I buy let's say a $50,000 house, I then own a $50,000 house. I had cash that was worth $50,000, and now I have a house that is worth $50,000. My wealth has not changed in that case. You are only experiencing expense if your ability to consume decreases or your cash decreases. So again, we can use the same heuristic we used for income. How do you know when something is an expense? Use the definition of wealth. If your financial situation changes, you stop and you ask yourself, can I consume more or less than before? If your ability to consume has decreased, you have experienced an expense. Both income and expense involve changes in wealth. We also need to be able to figure out what our wealth is at a fixed point in time. While we can describe changes in wealth with the terms income, expense, we will need assets and liabilities to discuss our wealth at a fixed point in time. So what are assets? Assets are property that stores value or reduces expenses. The more assets you have, the greater your wealth. Now, the most familiar kinds of assets are assets that you can take and then sell at some point in the future. So a car, gold, house. These are possessions where we commonly in our society acquire them and then sell them. And you can use the cash you get from selling them to fund your consumption. On that point, cash itself is an asset since it is storing value. However, cash is a very special kind of asset, so we often treat it separately, but it is an asset. It contributes positively to our wealth. Property can also be an asset if it retains value over an extended period of time, even if it can't be resold. My favorite example for this is a computer. Many people in our world own computers that are old, maybe 4 years old. I have a friend who does this. She still uses her computer to check email and browse the web. However, she could not sell it. It's too old and too slow. No one would buy her computer. However, if she didn't have it, she would have to go get a computer in order to check her email and browse the web. So in this regard, her property is reducing her expenses even though she can't trade it to someone for cash. If she didn't have this computer, she would have to go spend her other resources on another computer. So in this regard, this property, a computer that can't be resold for a significant sum, is still reducing expenses, still can be considered an asset. Liabilities are the flip side of assets. They are obligations to make future payments. They are your debts. The greater your liabilities, the less your wealth, since the money that you have will be used to pay them off and can't be used for consumption. So again, we have assets which contribute positively to our wealth, and liabilities which are contributing negatively to our wealth. They usually come from borrowing cash, and unpaid liabilities usually increase over time due to interest. Let's stop for a second and see how well we understand these concepts. So I'd like you to please quiz yourself at home. I'm going to go through this kind of quick, but you can pause the video to stop and think about and even just respond to these questions. What we're going to do is we're going to look at 6 situations, and then we're going to ask ourselves, is our cash balance going up, down, or staying the same? U stands for up, D stands for down, and S stands for the same. And then we're going to decide, are we earning income? Are we acquiring a non-cash asset? Notice that acquiring an asset, I specified non-cash. Are we incurring an expense? Are we increasing liabilities, or is none of the above happening? Let's start with number 1. You're paid $5 an hour for 3 hours of babysitting. What's happening here? Well, I'm working and then I'm getting paid money, so my cash balance is going up. And because my cash balance has gone up, I have more money with which to consume, so I should be earning income. Let's take a stab at number 2. You buy 2 slices of pizza for $2. And we're going to go ahead and assume that you eat them. So what's happening? Well, certainly I spent money, so my cash balance is going down, and I am going to be eating this pizza as soon as I buy it, so I am incurring an expense because my ability to consume after having eaten the pizzas is now less. I have 2 pizzas less ability to consume, or $2 each less to consume. Let's see what we got. Yeah, my cash balance goes down, and I'm incurring expenses. All right, so now let's say you live in New York City and you buy a 1-month subway pass for $100 that you're going to use to get to school every day. So first, I spend $100, so my cash balance is going down, but I'm getting a subway pass that I'm going to use to get to school every day. If I didn't have it, I'd have to pay for the subway and buy another subway pass. So this is going to be reducing my expenses. I'm giving away $100, and I'm getting a subway pass worth $100. I'm not incurring an expense because my ability to consume is the same. My cash balance is going down, but I am acquiring a non-cash asset. That subway pass is going to act in some sense like money as I use it to get on the subway every day. Okay, next, number 4. You sell your computer to a friend for $200, a fair price. Now, the fair price is very important there. I'm selling a computer worth $200, and in exchange, I'm getting $200. So, has my ability to consume changed? It hasn't. Now, I'm turning a computer, which is contributing positively to my wealth as an asset, into another kind of asset, cash. The fact that it's fair means I'm not gaining money or losing money on my friend. Now, unfortunately here we say we are acquiring a non-cash asset. So I'm acquiring cash, and so what's happening here is none of the above. You see, our cash went up, but because we lost something worth $200, our wealth did not change. Your friend lends you $10. What's happening here? My cash is going up by $10, but I'm also acquiring an IOU, a debt, to my friend of $10. So while my cash went up by $10, I acquired a liability which contributes negatively to my wealth by $10. In the end, my wealth hasn't changed, so I'm neither experiencing income or expense. In fact, what I have done is my cash has increased, but I have also increased my liabilities because I now owe my friend $10. You earn $5 interest on your savings. So what's happening here? My cash balance is going up, and I earned $5 interest. Did I give anything away in exchange to earn that $5? No. So my ability to consume has increased by $5, therefore I am earning income and my cash balance has gone up. If as we were going through these activities, you're looking at them and you said to yourself, well, okay, but what if I don't eat the pizza? Then it's still worth $2. Or, all right, well, what if I've already used the subway pass? You're right. We can add sentences or take sentences away to these little stories to try to change where it would fall on this grid. And if you're a teacher and your students are doing that, that's not bad. What they're actually doing is showing you that they understand. So let me give you an example of what I mean about how we can have more backstory and it can change what one of these little situations are. In general, if you're a teacher and you're going to be doing this with your students, you really have to stress that we're going to assume that only the situation as described happened and that there's no other backstory. Inevitably, your students will add backstory. So let's see what happens in a situation like that. So now you go and you buy these new limited edition LeBron James sneakers, and I want to know, what kind of transaction is this? It really depends. Let's say you buy these new limited edition LeBron James sneakers, and then you use them to play in a very important basketball game at the YMCA. In this case, you've incurred an expense. You paid for sneakers, and then they lost value when you used them. What if instead you buy them with the intent to sell them to your brother and you never wear them? Well, in this case, you've now acquired an asset because those sneakers are storing value. What if you buy them with the intention of selling them to your brother, but you buy them for the asking price of almost $500, and then your brother is only willing to pay you $300? In this case, you first acquired an asset, but then you incurred an expense when you sold them for less than you purchased. What if the opposite happens? You buy them and you intend to sell them to your brother for $300, but you get them through a connection at the store and you only pay $225. Well, now it's very similar to the last example. You've acquired an asset, and then you receive income when you sell them for more than you paid. They're initially storing value, but then when you sell them for more than you paid, they increase your ability to consume. Now we can revisit our story about Stingy Steve and Flashy Fiona. And we can break down their scenario systematically using these 4 concepts and talk about it much more intelligently. Looking at the scenario, which is summarized in the bullets on the left, you can see that Steve's only asset is his cash, and his liability is his debt to loan shark Shady Pete. He doesn't have a great source of income, and he has massive expenses from his interest on his debt. Fiona, on the other hand, while she doesn't have cash assets like Pete, has all these non-cash assets with her property, her clothes, and her stocks, and she has a much higher source of income due to her law degree. From this, we can conclude that Fiona's wealth both now and in the future is much higher than Steve's. So I want to stop for a second and just talk to the teachers in the room about the various ways we can interact with these concepts and these ideas with our students. My favorite is a flashcard activity. So I like to give students like index cards, 2 index cards. On one side, you write asset and liability, or A and L. And then on the other index card, you write I on one side for income and E for expense on the other side. You give students these 2 cards and you call out scenarios similar to the scenarios that we were going over in the grid. And then you let students hold up what they think. So you say, okay, you get a babysitting job for 3 hours, you get paid $5 an hour, and all the students get to hold up their card that has an eye on it to show that that's you experiencing income. What's very nice about this is it creates a low-stakes environment which encourages all students to respond, but provides them a little bit of wiggle room if they're not sure. Because this is a little different than your average math class, where your answers might be different based on your thinking or your rationale, we want to give students this opportunity to put up a card, look and see what other people have done, and maybe change their opinion. As the teacher, you'll see what they initially said, but this low-stakes environment gives students a chance to save face in front of their peers while giving you, the teacher, all the data you want. You see what they hold up initially, and you can even see which students self-correct. Now, this flashcard activity idea goes great with student-driven examples. I briefly mentioned how much students love coming up with silly examples like stealing money from your sibling, or finding money on the floor, or the fact that putting a penny in the fountain to make a wish is an expense. So let students come up with their own silly examples. Often the more ridiculous examples they come up with are betraying their conceptual understandings. So students who come up with very good, silly examples really get it. And it requires a little bit of creativity to do that. So let them do it. They enjoy it. It's fun. And you can use the flashcard activity as an on-the-fly way to respond to student-driven examples. Let a student come to the front, give their example, let the other students hold up their cards. It can be a really fun way to get students interacting with students and break the paradigm of students always interacting directly with the teacher. The last thing I'll mention is this great website, wodb.ca. It's Which One Doesn't Belong. It's a wonderful website. We are not affiliated with them with any way. I don't know anyone who even works there, but as a teacher for over a decade, I used to use this website a lot, and I love it. Basically, it creates puzzles where there's 4 things, and one of them doesn't belong for a reason, but the truth is that each of them doesn't belong for a reason. So they might be, 4 numbers, and all but one is a perfect square, and all but one is even, and all but one, and they have these different scenarios. It's wonderful. I suggest you go and check out the webpage. I bring it up because you can take scenarios and create which one doesn't belong puzzles with them. I'm not going to belabor the point here. Go to the webpage, check it out, and after looking at the webpage, you'll have an idea of what I mean. Now, these 4 concepts are related in somewhat obvious ways, but they are explicitly related in these equations that we're going to talk about right now. So first, I'd like to talk about the net worth equation. Now, we already talked about wealth. Wealth is essentially your net worth. It is defined as your assets minus your liabilities, right? In a sense, it is your ability to consume, and it captures how much money you would have left, or how much wealth you would have left if you paid off all of your debts and looked at your remaining wealth. Now, for math classes, this equation bothers me. Why does this equation bother me? Really dislike the NW. Right? In math class, we teach kids that 2 variables next to each other means you multiply them. And then here in our course, we're using an NW equals A minus L. Now, why are we doing that? We're doing that because when they leave our classroom, when students are no longer with us, this is what they're going to see, right? This is how people talk about the net worth equation. This is what they'll see in other literature outside of math class. And so we need to just explain to them, listen, sometimes a variable is represented by 2 letters. And one of the ways we deal with it in our materials, if you're using the PhiCycle course, is we never list this equation without also listing an accompanying formula so that you can see that NW equals net worth. I think it's important to discuss this with students, but they don't tend to have a problem with it after you go over it. So Let's actually look at some examples of how students might interact with this. We can come up with a really simple example. Emilio has $101,500 in assets, $450 in liabilities. Let's calculate his net worth. They can go ahead and just calculate his net worth directly. In this case, we're really just substituting values for variables. However, we can ask students to do a multi-step problem. This is in some sense a two-step equation, but not in the way that most teachers think. You can give students a scenario like this in which a character has more than one asset and more than one liability, and now students need to sum assets and sum liabilities before putting them into the equation. This is a different activity, requires more than one step, and I think it's kind of an in-between step that we often skip in math classes. Certainly it's worthwhile for understanding personal finance, but I would also make a big case for this for when students are first learning to interact with equations and variables in the math classroom. In addition to the net worth equation, we also have the net income equation. The net income equation helps us relate income and expenses. Net income is defined as your income minus your expenses. Now again, we have the same issue I had with net worth here, which is the NI is supposed to represent one variable, net income. So you please need to make sure that if you're working with students, you point this out. That does not stand for N times I. Net income is standing for one variable, net income, and we're always going to have the key there whenever we see the equation to try to drive that point home. Now, you can do all the same kinds of activities involving solving for an unknown or substitution with this equation as you could the last. From a mathematical standpoint, they're identical. However, what's interesting is the fact that these concepts are related. When you compare the net worth equation with the net income equation, you can see that because one is describing our wealth at a fixed point in time and the other is describing changes in wealth, a change in one requires a change in the other. So you can see that all four of these financial categories have to stay balanced and are in relation to each other. And this is part of why finance is fundamentally linked not just to arithmetic, but also to algebra. It's also kind of fun to point out to students that accounting is the job of making sure that these equations stay balanced as we do business and engage in things in our financial lives. So let's see an example of how we can create a question and have students think about this balancing and this comparing. So I'm going to read the question to you first, and then I'm going to have you pause and do the video. So you incur an expense of $100. Which of the following is not compatible with this? A, you lose an asset worth $100 and nothing else changes. B, your liabilities increase by $100 and nothing else changes. C, your liabilities decrease by $100 and nothing else changes. And D, a pickpocket takes $100 cash out of your wallet. So let's stop for a second, pause the video, respond to this question. Okay, what did you get? So it turns out that the answer is C. And incurring an expense of $100 is not compatible with your liabilities decreasing by $100 because liabilities contribute negatively to our wealth. Therefore, when they decrease, that would be earning income. You would be increasing your wealth by $100 if your liabilities decreased by $100. You can see that the others are compatible with incurring an expense of $100. Assets contribute positively to our wealth. So A, you lose an asset worth $100 is an expense of $100. Liabilities contribute negatively to our wealth. So B, your liabilities increase by $100 is an expense of $100. And D, a pickpocket takes $100 out of your wallet. Again, this represents an expense of $100 because you have $100 less with which to consume. So just a note to teachers. The idea that when we add something to one side of an equation, we have to see a corresponding change to the other side of the equation is a concept that students need to learn in school, particularly usually in algebra, around the concept of equality. However, you can see that by using situations and scenarios which are familiar to our students, we can activate their prior knowledge by getting them to interact with this real world concept, or this concept in a real world example, like the ones we're talking about today. By talking about money and introducing these concepts and having students do this reasoning around equality in scenarios that are familiar to them, we access their prior knowledge and we provide an opportunity for them to both model and practice the modeling of real world things in mathematics, This is really powerful. It also gives students who might be confused about the abstract notions we try to teach them about equality some access points by thinking about these scenarios which are not entirely unfamiliar. So I want to take a step back for a moment and contrast what we've talked about today with the traditional focus of personal finance on budgeting. Traditional personal finance courses tend to focus on budgeting, and they try to teach students a rule. They teach them, be sensible and thrifty with your money rather than fickle and impulsive. Make sure you're spending less than you have coming in. However, this really misses the big picture. Budgeting is important, but if you want to be wealthy over your financial life cycle, you need to think about wealth more broadly. And so our approach tries to empower students to think critically about their financial goals and help them meet them. The irony is not lost on students when you look at seniors and tell them, make sure you're spending less than you make. And the first financial decision that they have to make in their lives is to take out a huge loan for more than they've ever made and go to college. Now, not everyone goes to college. It's not right for everyone. But for those who do, our traditional focus on budgeting doesn't really explain the very first financial decision they have to make. The materials that we used in today's presentation come from the FiCycle course. The materials used today in our presentation are taken from the FiCycle curriculum, which is short for Financial Lifecycle Mathematics. FiCycle is a math class that provides a theoretically grounded introduction to personal finance for high school and early college students. At roughly the level of Algebra 2, the mathematics is differentiable and can either be differentiated up to make it much more difficult or made a little bit simpler for students at a slightly lower level. However the course is taught, it helps people to navigate the financial calculations and decisions a person must make over the course of their lifetime, over their financial life cycle. Now, typically, students will usually take the course at the end of their senior year or junior year, but often the course is used alongside other math classes as an elective, or to help students remediate algebra without being stuck in the same cycle of endlessly taking the same course again and again. You can see that the course is broken up into 5 units plus a supplementary 6th unit. The first 3 units are largely concerned with the basics of personal finance and the mathematics of transferring consumption across time, while the latter units are more concerned with modeling and the risk incurred in the transfer of consumption. For teachers who choose to teach the FiCycle curriculum or bring it into their school, we provide a complete set of materials. This includes UBD-style unit plans, student-centered workbooks and other materials, as well as a suite of projects and summative assessments. We also support teachers new to the FiCycle curriculum by bringing them in for training the summer before their first year teaching the curriculum to make sure they feel comfortable with all the personal finance and mathematics contained in the first 3 units. We also offer a secondary training in the middle of the year before the start of the spring semester to help teachers with the latter units. If you would like more information about FiCycle, either to have it in your school or just because you're interested in teaching math and personal finance together, please visit our webpage at www.ficycle.org or go ahead and email us at info@ficycle.org. We'd be very happy to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching this video today. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us with comments or questions. Again, my name is Phil Deturi. I'm the Director of Education at FiCycle, and I really appreciate your time helping to learn about and spread this important work. I hope you have a fantastic day.